All right, welcome back to the deep dive.
Hmm.
If you're looking for a shortcut to getting your head around the really complex parts of IP law, you're definitely in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're jumping back into the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure, the MPP, and we're zeroing in on Chapter 2300. That's the one on interference and derivation proceedings.
And our focus today is pretty specific. It's MPP Section 2308, action after an interference.
Right, so this isn't about the fight itself anymore. This is about the cleanup.
Exactly. It's all about what happens inside the USPTO the moment that fight is over.
So our mission today is really to figure out that operational fallout. How does the examiner enforce the judgment? What do they have to do? And maybe the biggest piece, how does estoppel make sure a lost battle stays lost?
Yeah, that's it. We're looking at how the USPTO gets to finality once the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, the board, makes its call.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with that fundamental idea of finality. A judgment in an interference, it says it's a final disposition. What gives it so much weight?
It's the scope, the sheer scope of it. It doesn't just resolve the issues that were, explicitly argued out during the interference.
Mm-hmm.
It resolves all the issues that could have been raised.
Wow. That phrase could have been raised. That feels like a massive legal tripwire.
Oh, it absolutely is. If your team misses an argument, you've waived it. Forever.
So the system is really demanding that you be thorough from the get-go.
It is. Once judgment's in, the losing party is just legally boxed in.
Yeah.
They can't take any action at the USPTO that's inconsistent with that decision.
Is there any exception?
A very narrow one. Only if they happen to win a favorable judgment on a really specific separate issue. But otherwise, the application file zips right back to the examining court.
So jurisdiction shifts back to the examiner instantly. What's the first thing on their to-do list when that file lands on their desk?
Well, their first step is a procedural check. They have to look at the board's decision itself. If the board included any recommendations for further action.
Like for rejecting other claims.
Exactly. If the board recommended rejecting, say, Claim 5, that recommendation is, for all intents and purposes, mandatory.
Mandatory how? Does the examiner have any wiggle room to disagree?
Almost none. Not in this context. They must reopen prosecution, they must enter that recommended rejection, and they must maintain it. It really takes the examiner's own judgment on that point off the table.
That's a huge constraint. So if you're the applicant and you get hit with this mandatory rejection, what can you do? You can't just argue with the examiner that the board got it wrong.
Correct. Your options are very limited. You either have to amend the claim in a way that gets around the board's issue, or you have to bring in new, really persuasive evidence that's enough to overcome that specific rejection. It's a high bar.
And what if the board's decision is just silent? No recommendations at all?
Then things get a bit simpler. The examiner just resumes normal prosecution. They might still need to update their prior art search for any claims that weren't really part of the interference, but it's basically back to business as usual.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Let's talk about claims that a party tries to add during the interference.
Yes. A very common point of confusion.
So let's say I'm in the middle of this fight. I make a motion to the board to add 2 new claims, and I win that motion. Does that mean those 2 claims are good to go once the interference is over?
No, and that's the key takeaway. Getting that authorization from the board is purely a procedural win.
Procedural, not substantive.
Right. It means you get the claims officially entered into the record. But that's it.
Okay, so the board gave me permission to add them. But the examiner can still come back later and reject them?
Completely. Those authorized claims are still fully subject to normal examination standards. The examiner keeps total discretion to reject them for any reason. Lack of written descriptions, subject matter eligibility, new prior art they find after the interference.
So you could win the interference, feel like you're on top of the world, and then the examiner just shoots down your new claims for a completely different reason.
It can be a massive shock, yes. It just underscores that the interference is only solving the priority question between you and the other party. It's not a guarantee your claim is patentable against everything else in the world.
Which brings us to the enforcement mechanism.
What's fascinating here is the concept of estoppel. That's the hammer. It's how MPPP Section 2308 makes these decisions stick and prevents you from relitigating.
So how does an examiner use estoppel in practice?
Yeah.
I mean, how do they spot a new application and flag it as being barred by an old ruling?
They're looking for overlap with the subject matter that was lost in the interference. Once you lose on an issue, you are barred from raising it again. And we really see two main forms of this:
Okay, what are they?
substantive and procedural.
Let's start with substantive estoppel.
Okay. Substantive estoppel stops the loser from getting claims that are anticipated or obvious in light of what they lost.
Give me an example.
Sure. Imagine the interference was over a new chemical, compound X. Party A loses priority. Substantive estoppel means Party A can't just file a new application claiming compound X again,
Right.
and they can't claim an obvious variation either, like compound X with, a minor tweak. The examiner is required to reject it.
So the loss covers not just the specific thing you fought over, but the whole obvious cloud around it.
That's a perfect way to put it. That entire subject matter is now considered to belong to the winner.
Okay, and the second type, procedural estoppel.
This is where strategy really comes into play. Procedural estoppel stops a party from raising arguments they could have made during the interference but didn't.
So if you miss a deadline for a motion.
Exactly. Let's say you failed to argue that a claim didn't really correspond to the interference count, a technical but important argument. You can't bring that up later to try and wiggle out of the judgment. You had your chance and you missed it.
That feels harsh. It means a single procedural slip-up can cost you an argument forever.
It does. The system forces you to put all your cards on the table at once. There is one important exception, though.
A fairness-based one, I hope?
It is. Estoppel does not apply if the board itself stopped you from addressing an issue. If you filed a motion and the board denied it or said it was out of scope, you aren't penalized for that.
That makes sense. Okay, what about special judgments? Like when the board says there was no interference in fact.
Right. That happens when the board decides the inventions weren't really stepping on each other's toes enough to even have a priority contest.
And the result of that?
The key result is that nobody is officially a loser. And because of that, no estoppel arises.
So everyone just walks away clean.
From an estoppel standpoint, yes. But there's a catch. You can't declare a second interference between those same parties on that same subject matter later. The dispute is settled, just without a winner or a loser.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, what's the final step? The appeal.
The appeal process is the ultimate finality mechanism. If the losing party takes it all the way up to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, the CAFC, and that court affirms the board's decision.
How absolute is that?
It is absolute closure. The case officially ends when the CAC issues its mandate, and there's a key case here, Morgan Roth v. Quigg from 1989. It confirms that once that mandate is issued, the USPTO has no authority to revive the application.
No authority to revive. What does that mean in practical terms? Is the application just dead?
Yes. Functionally dead at the USPTO. It cannot be brought back. It can't be reconsidered. The court has spoken, and the administrative agency, the USPTO, has to stop. It's all about ensuring that judicial closure is the final word.
So if we pull it all together, what does this all mean? MPEP Section 2308 is really about defining closure. It ensures consistency, it hands control back to the examiner, but it also ties the examiner's hands to the board's rulings. It makes the outcome of an interference a permanent part of the record.
An enforceable reality within the USPTO.
Yes. Before we close out, we do want to extend a very special thank you to Mike Shepard, the creative director who organized this entire audio series.
Indeed.
And please remember our disclaimer. This summary of the MPEP was generated using AI tools, including ChatGPT and NotebookLM, and it may have errors or omissions. It's for general educational and informational purposes only. It is not legal advice.
For any authoritative guidance, please consult the official MPEP, a qualified instructor, or a registered patent practitioner.
That leaves us with a final thought.
It does, and this raises an important question for me. Given the immense power of estoppel and that ironclad finality from cases like Morgan Roth v. Quigg, just how critical is the strategic decision to raise every single possible ground during that initial interference, knowing that if you stay silent on something now, well, it means permanent surrender later?